Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Thoreau, and I'm the president of the Independent Institute. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our program this evening. It's one in a series that we regularly hold called the Independent Policy Forum. And we're quite delighted this evening to be hosting the acclaimed new film, No Safe Spaces, at our conference center here in Oakland. One of the co-producers is with us. Owen Brennan has told us that we are both the Bay Area and California premiere of the film. So thank you for coming. For those of you who are new to the Independent Institute, at your seats, there's a registration packet which explains some of our work. We are a think tank, a nonprofit scholarly public policy institute. We sponsor major studies of social and economic issues, and our mission is to boldly advance peaceful, prosperous, and free societies with a commitment to human worth and dignity. The results of this work are published as books and other publications and form the basis of numerous conference and media projects like tonight. I'll put a little plug also for one of our film projects, which is called LoveGov. It's also in your packet. It's on YouTube. We now have over 20 million combined views, 98% of whom are millennials, incidentally, because we target millennials for it. It's funny, and it deals with issues that are not unrelated to what's going to be discussed tonight, as well as housing and healthcare, and so on and so forth. We also invite you to become a member of Independent if you're not. There are many benefits, which you'll also find on a card in your packet, and we hope that you'll enjoy more of what Independent is about. I also wanted to point out that tonight's subject pertains to one of our newest books called Restoring the Promise, Higher Education in America. We also have that at a special discount, another shameless plug, and also a book called Restoring Free Speech and Liberty on Campus, which we published through Cambridge and has won many different book awards over the years. As all of you know, today college campuses have increasingly become some of the most intolerant places for diverse and even conventional viewpoints. The First Amendment, intellectual freedom, and the very idea of free speech are under attack with threats, bans, and even violence. A growing number of Americans don't even believe you have the right to speak in what they might find offensive to some people somewhere. They advocate for campuses to be safe spaces in which open debate and discussions are not allowed. And this disturbing movement has now been extending beyond colleges and into the wider world. And the film discusses some of that and its implications. The film No Safe Spaces stars the comedian Adam Carolla and radio talk show host Dennis Prager as they travel the country, talk with experts on the right and the left, tour college campuses, and work to understand what is happening in America today and what free speech should look like. With the help of a wide range of public figures who you'll see in the film, No Safe Spaces explores why the free exchange of ideas is fundamental to a free society, and attacks on the First Amendment are really attacks on the foundations of America and a free society itself. Now, after the screening, we will take a short break and we will reconfigure the stage here with a panel that will be led by my colleague, Dr. Graham Walker. Graham is Executive Director here at the Independent Institute, and you'll find information on the panelists also in the flyer in your packet. So without any further ado, let's watch the film.
You have the right to remain silent.
Anything you say will be used against you.
You are not listening. I want your job to be taken from you.
A protest has turned violent in California, Berkeley.
This is why we're fighting for the soul of America.
You should be able to share ideas without fear of being fired from your job or shouted down.
You are not to be heard. This is one of the few things one could say we have no precedent for in the United States.
You have the right to remain silent.
The only way we separate the good ideas from the bad ideas is to be free to say whatever we want about them.
Anything you say will be used against you.
There's no free speech for fascists.
Your posts on Facebook, Twitter, and social media will be saved to shame you.
Kevin Hart has stepped down from hosting this year's Oscars.
Anything you say that we don't like will be used to shut you up. You can't be funny.
It's creating an atmosphere of fear and repression, and it's gonna bust.
You cannot think differently.
It makes it difficult for you to learn from other people.
Isn't it spooky that we're having this discussion?
You can't challenge us.
Kids grew up dipped in Purell, playing soccer games where they never kept score.
There is no debate.
The type of diversity that they hate is diversity of thought.
We reserve the right to be offended by everything.
No university should ever create a safe space.
You're not going to protect people, and so the best you can do is to make them strong.
It bothers me for the young people who are being deprived of anything that could open their minds.
You have the right to remain silent.
Okay, great. I think we are ready to start this segment. It's a real pleasure to have so many old friends and new here tonight. I recognize a number of you from many of our other events. Thank you for joining us at the Independent Institute. I'm Graham Walker, the executive director, as David Thoreau announced at the beginning. And this was quite a treat. Now, we have several colleagues up here who have their own participation in this story, their own wisdom to share. Let me tell you a little bit about who's up here. Then we're going to talk a little bit. Then we're going to take some questions from you. We could go on probably a long time, but we'll try and make it, as effective as we can to get to the heart of the matter. So let me begin introducing a few people. Owen Brennan is the co-founder of Madison McQueen, which is the company that produced the film. So we're going to learn, he deserves that for sure. So we're going to learn a little bit more about his role in this in a minute. To my left also is Greg Michael, who is a lawyer with the Dillon Law Group and was very involved in the case Young Americans for Freedom versus Napolitano et al., which is the case coming off of the University of California, Berkeley disputes, and he helped resolve that. So we'll hear more from Greg in a minute. Turning then to Matt, I got a glimpse of you, Matt, going off the stage, yes. Like trailing after, I guess it was Dennis Prager. We saw you. And Matt, you are the president of the College Republicans at UC Berkeley. Is that right?
Yes.
And I understand that you're going to be graduating in the spring. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
But in the meanwhile, he's done great work at organizing over there and stands clearly for free speech.
Yeah, thank you.
Joseph Scherer is a longtime friend of the Institute, and he got a broken nose because he was at UC Berkeley campus holding up a sign favoring free speech. So if you're wondering why he's not as photogenic as he used to be, apparently that's the
it goes more left now.
Seriously. Okay, so we're going to come back to that story in a minute. But first, let's turn to Owen. So you're like a genius behind this film. Why did you make this happen? How did it happen?
First, thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me here and showing our film. Making a film is like probably the most collaborative thing, other than maybe putting a man on the moon, you can possibly do. So there's a collective genius behind this, including my two business partners, director, editor. 3.5 years ago, one of the other producers, RJ, brought Dennis Prager to our company, a production company, and said, we want to make a film. And Dennis wants to make a film about what young people think. And I thought, oh, that sounds horrible. And so you saw that first event we were going to have with Adam and Dennis at CSUN, December 1st, 2016. That event was supposed to be what it's like for conservatives on campus in this new Trump world. And that's what the CSUN sort of freaked out about. And as Dennis eloquently points out there, never has a film proved its thesis so quickly. Adam, we did a cross-country tour of about 6 of those events across the country, talking to young people. We took Dennis to places around the country. and stitched this sort of storyline together. The real sort of the thing that really we sort of gelled around was when we saw two things happening. One was people like Charles Murray, Heather McDonald, Christina Hoff Sommers were being shouted down on college campus. You know, people who know Heather McDonald, she is 90 pounds wet, she's about 4 feet tall, a menace, total menace. And her academic research, which helped transform the city of New York for the better, is being shouted down by petulant children on college campuses. So we saw that as a real turning point.
Murray was the one who was shouted down at Middlebury.
Yes.
His host was the one who had her neck in a brace.
Mauled, yes.
Yeah, mauled.
And so that was one of the things. And the other thing that we saw, when I was in college in the 90s, I ran the conservative paper at the University of Oregon. That was the dawn of diversity for the sake of diversity, multiculturalism for the sake of multiculturalism. And we saw this sort of progression over the years. And then it was social justice, then it was cultural appropriation, then microaggressions. And it struck us that, you know what, all along, it's been identity politics. The left just keeps changing the name of it, putting a new bit of polish on it, and trying to repackage it and resell it on a college campus, which is really easy because they have an audience that keeps churning over every 4 years. So the administrations and professors get crazier and crazier. Their kids keep going through. And so we really saw this as an opportunity to identify both of these trends that were happening.
You got a lot of footage on these campuses. Did you get resistance to actually having film crews? Did people pelt you, or they upset you?
No.
I don't think the first event at CSUN, there was a bit of tension outside. They were like, because everybody on campus knew that we had been sort of canceled or banned once, and we snuck in somehow, getting our lawyer to enforce their own rules. So there was like this tension outside, but it never really broke. Never really.
But you also inherited a lot of footage from other sources.
Yes, and we followed Ann to Berkeley. We followed Ben Shapiro.
Yeah.
We were very present.
People had their cell phone, and videos that you captured some of.
Yes.
First person, and there was that incredible recording.
Well, yes, Lindsay Shepard.
Yeah, at Wilfrid Laurier in Canada. My gosh. I mean, that was so damning to the people. I could see why they were mad. They were exposed to the folly. So turning to Joe, which event was it where you got your nose broken? And why in the world were you there?
Oh, this is a tough question. Well, it was... some people call it the Milo Yiannopoulos event.
Okay. Were you a
I just call it the Berkeley riot.
Oh, yeah, I was there.
So Nat was a student. He was at the event.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Okay.
Were you out there?
Oh, yeah, I was in the room with the Milo.
Oh,
really?
Yeah. So he was outside.
Yeah.
He's defending you. That's right. Yeah.
But by the time you got there, was it canceled?
Yeah. No, I had for some reason gotten in my head that even though I'm not a Milo fan, I just couldn't believe the home of the free speech movement, Berkeley, California. They were going to ban these or try to shut down these speakers. So I made a sign, which was very beautiful. And
what did it say?
It said, the First Amendment protects all speech. And then they'd flip it over and it says, even Milo. And the even Milo part, I think, is the most important part.
Right.
Because apparently Berkeley students, or at least Antifa, doesn't read syntax very carefully. Because most people would realize even Milo doesn't mean you're protecting Milo, you're after free speech, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I could go on into all the detail, but basically, I show up with my sign, and it's got it's about 1,500 people there, according to the police later, and they'd already banned the speaker. Shut down the speaker, and so it was.
And where were you when the
dicey event
got canceled?
So I was in the MLK Student Union,
with Milo before the
event. They had police with them, I think.
Yeah,
they weren't doing much for us.
Right.
So after Milo had gotten canceled and they had escorted him out, they sent us out the back door with no security presence.
Wow.
And students began to see this and were calling us fascists and racist and began.
So were you escaping to a car?
Oh yeah. So we all broke up and some of us, me and a couple others, went to a nearby dorm and called an Uber because Antifa were following us and we didn't want to know what they were going to do.
So while they were escaping, you were in the crowd with a sign.
Right. And so I get halfway across Sproul Plaza, and then out of the middle of nowhere, I feel someone attack me from kind of pull me around and smash my face, and I'm on the ground in a millisecond. And I get up and I look around to see who it was to defend myself or whatever. And asking these people, who did that? Who did that? And they say, oh, he's gone. He's gone.
Were there police nearby when you?
Oh, no. In fact, when they canceled the public address system, said everyone's directed to leave. 1,500 people don't leave. They're there for another purpose. Anyway, but I didn't leave either. And but there were no police, and they said they were not going to have a police presence. So they had decided to protect the people that needed it.
Well, probably
not you.
Protect you either. I mean, that was the trouble. The whole thing seemed like a forfeiture of duty.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in fact, I didn't realize it was Antifa that broke my nose until I called the police. I figured I should report my little, do my little police report thing.
Right.
And I asked them, so do you have any cameras because I have no idea who hit me. And they did look back and found that it was one of those people in black masks.
Yeah, not surprising. At the end of the video, there's that recommendation, very simple. What do you do? Stand up for free speech and also say what you believe. So, I mean, I look at Joe and I say, well, here's a guy, he's an attorney. He could have stayed in his, safe law offices with his paneled walls and books. But instead, he was brave.
I didn't realize it was going to be, after all, they'd canceled the speaker by the time I got there. But it was clear to me that the people there, many people there, particularly Antifa folks, and you saw a lot of the riot on the screen there, and it was really scary because it must have been what the people in Germany saw with the brown shirts because they were very organized. But they were there for some damage, and it didn't matter that they'd already won the event.
Right.
They were going to
further intimidation. Right. Now, Matt, you've been there for 3.5 years at Cal. You must have been involved in the whichever incident it was, and you can clarify this, that ultimately led to the threatened lawsuit and then the settlement between Young Americans for Freedom and the university. Which incident was that, and were you involved at all?
Yeah, so I was a freshman that year, 2017, and it kind of all started when we tried to bring Milo, and that got all canceled. And then we tried to bring...
We being college Republicans?
Yes, the Berkeley College Republicans. Then we tried to bring David Horowitz, and that was put off campus and then ultimately canceled. And then we tried to bring Ann Coulter, and then the university ultimately canceled that one as well. At that point, we reached out to Dylan Law, and got
he's with Dylan Law.
Yes,
we're coming to you next.
and so it was kind of the Ann Coulter cancellation that was kind of the straw.
And which year was that?
2017, April of 2017.
So before that happened, did you ever get any speaker actually to speak?
No, we didn't get a speaker to speak while I was a student until we got Ben.
Good grief!
Yeah.
Which year was it when you tried to get Ann there? Or were you a sophomore by then?
No, I was a freshman.
So you're still a freshman.
Yeah.
So that year was the year of failure, except that ultimately there was a lawsuit.
Yeah.
And the lawsuit claimed that the university was, what was the complaint?
They were restricting our speech and leveling arbitrary security fees, which was they were doing, and they do that at other campuses across the university too.
Yeah, we saw incidences of that in the movie, obviously, where the security costs are supposed evidently to be borne by the people who wanted to speak, not by the people who were causing the violence. And of course, the theory there is that the words spoken by conservatives are tantamount to violence, which then justifies actual physical violence in response to the putative violence. It's a kind of rhetorical sleight of hand that you can see going on, that once words are made tantamount to violence, then actual violence seems to feel justified. And the university wanted the simple speakers who were not acting out violently at all to pay the cost of those who were going to act out violently. So how did your firm get involved, and what happened next? It didn't actually get a judgment in court, right?
That's right. Yeah, we settled at some point. So as I recall, we were brought in kind of in the middle of this chaos. Nobody knew what was really going on. None of the explanations that the university was providing made any sense whatsoever. So we decided to move forward with the lawsuit. That was the only way we were going to get answers. And right after we filed the lawsuit, suddenly, like, oh, okay, you're right. We should have a written policy. We shouldn't just do all this ad hoc random stuff. And so they wrote down some policy and published it. And so we had to amend the lawsuit because now the written policy is basically you just wrote down the terrible things that you were doing before. So that wasn't like a step forward. It was just sort of a lateral step.
It was a bit of candor.
It that's one word for it. Sure. But yeah.
So what happened next?
So we went through that process a few times. And I mean, there was improvement during those iterations of their various speech policies. But eventually the judge just got tired of this back and forth, understandably so, and just said, okay, you guys need to sit in a room and talk to each other and figure out what's actually going to work so that we don't have to deal with this lawsuit and you guys in my courtroom anymore. So we did that. And at that point, the main issue left to resolve was really the security fees.
Which were being differentially imposed depending upon the point of view of the sponsoring group.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you could be, the Dalai Lama in, the Greek theater in Berkeley with 1,000 people there and lots of protesters, and it's a $5,000 security bill. If you're Ann Coulter, suddenly that number seems to jump. And because there at that time was no written policy, they would just point it out and say, well, this is going to require 100 officers, and we pay the officers, $150 an hour. So we're going to bill this much.
Yeah, well, it certainly was a big expense. I mean, the university, to be a forum for open speech, does have to protect the forum. And when people are attacking the forum, it costs money. So I'm sympathetic to their budgetary concerns. But your point from the legal point of view was what? What was your legal argument against the university's position?
Well, it kind of depends on what moment in time specifically, but...
Well, the most successful piece of it then.
Sure. Not having a written policy and you're just doing ad hoc things, that is almost universally going to be problematic for any kind of public entity, because it's going to give rise to concerns that the government is going to engage in viewpoint discrimination because there's nothing to point to. Instead, it's just some government employee making decisions on an ad hoc basis, and that just doesn't work. So they figured that part out pretty quickly right after we filed the lawsuit, and so they wrote it down at least. After that, the narrative sort of had to change to include due process violations, the fact that they were charging these fees without any kind of real procedure or justification for what they were doing.
So as a result of the settlement, which you guys procured, could Matt now invite Ann Coulter to speak at Cal?
I did.
Yes.
And you did.
I did.
and so she's coming later this month, I understand.
So it hasn't happened yet.
No. So Ann, we are hosting Ann with as the Berkeley College Republicans on November 20th.
And you've not been assessed a certain extra fee for it.
No, as a result of this lawsuit, the university has actually been very cooperative. And any security, as a result of the final events policy that was worked out, any security that they require, they pay for. So we're not leveled any arbitrary fees.
One thing that puzzles me about some of these Berkeley incidents is that, as in Joe's case, it was Antifa, probably a non-student, non-member of the university, who knocked him on the ground and changed the configuration of his profile. But so we're concerned that there's insufficient respect for freedom of speech on campuses and by students and faculty and so forth. But in many cases, the violence is not being done by students or faculty. Maybe I should ask you to comment on that. Is this a problem in university communities, or is this a problem being imposed from the outside upon university communities by non-academic people?
Yeah, I'd push back on that a little bit.
Okay. I thought you would.
Because there were students there at the Milo riots on February 1st, encouraging this violence to happen and cheering as people were punched. And then months later, op-eds were written in our student newspaper, the Daily Californian, saying, we're Antifa and we're students that go to school with you. And in September and in the fall, I saw a professor on campus wearing an Antifa shirt. So it's members of our campus community who support and are members of this violent organization.
So it's not just that these outsiders take opportunities and come onto campus, but they're actually invited or encouraged or maybe joined.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Joe?
Yeah, the administration right after the Berkeley riot was talking about, well, there weren't really students involved. These are the outsiders coming in. And I thought back, I think there were students involved, because after I got smacked, I get up and I look around and I see my sign over there, and it was a really good sign. And I thought, well, I'm halfway across this Sproul Plaza. I'm just going to pick it up and keep going because that's what I decided to do. So I picked it up, but I didn't get 2 steps further before a bunch of really young people that they didn't have their registration cards out, but I'm pretty sure they were students, decided they just had to rip up my sign. And as soon as they got about 5 of them and ripped it to pieces, then I was fine. I wasn't a threat to anyone at that point. So when people say it wasn't students, they weren't involved.
Well,
not true.
Also, I just saw this piece that was published yesterday about an interview done publicly on the Cal campus with a New Yorker reporter, Andrew Morantz. And he was on a panel with the dean of the journalism school and the chancellor of Berkeley, Carol Christ. And this gentleman from the New Yorker basically said that the truth and objectivity are different things, and that it's important to regulate speech because things that might be said might seem to be objective, that is to say impartial or even-handed, but actually one side is wrong and the other side is right. And so therefore, to be truthful, you need to favor one side in an argument. And he objected to the ideas of American exceptionalism, free speech, and the marketplace of ideas. And then the response from the panelists, namely the chancellor of the university and the dean of the community journalism school, essentially was just to chime right in with this argument that America ain't special, free speech is not necessarily so great, the marketplace of ideas is a bad metaphor. So at the highest level, my point is, as of recently in this news piece, at the highest level, university leaders are not engaging in the violence. I don't mean to imply that, but are advocating for a viewpoint which seems to drain the water out of the tub of free speech. This is draining away fast.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we got word yesterday, one of our club members is on the student senate and got word that the chancellor is planning alternative events the night of our Ann Coulter lecture for students.
Chancellor's planning.
Yeah, that she's putting on events.
Why not the college Democrats?
The college Democrats don't want us to have Ann on campus. They don't want to come and challenge her. Half the event is going to be question and answer for people to come up and
so the chancellor is organizing an alternative.
That's what we heard, that she's organizing events for people to feel safe.
Wow. That's amazing. Now, one of the things I noticed, and coming back to Greg here, I noticed frequently that there was an invocation of the First Amendment, but I also noticed that it appeared in the movie, and maybe Owen comment on this before we turn to Greg, it appeared in the movie that the actual appearance of the First Amendment was a kind of blurred antique script in the background, and no one actually ever read it. And so, when I looked at the First Amendment and to remind myself, it actually is very specific, and I want to find out from Greg how it applies to a campus like Berkeley. But it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment, religion, etc., or abridging the freedom of speech. So Congress wasn't involved in this process. So the question is going to be yours, but as just an aesthetic matter, how come the First Amendment didn't make a more explicit appearance, even though it was mentioned?
We had a dancing First Amendment.
I celebrate the actual words of the First Amendment did not appear. They weren't read. They weren't spoken.
They were behind Jim Jordan.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Getting somebody up there to read the exact words of the First Amendment. In fact, maybe to your point by your question to Greg, it's confusing, right?
Yeah.
Colleges are, public schools are an extension of government over their student bodies. So he can go into that, but it'll be a little confusing if we get up there and say.
That's a good answer. Okay. So, but now that we have the chance to dig a little deeper than you could in a movie format, Mr. Attorney, how does that thing about Congress making no law abridging the freedom of speech bear on the UC Berkeley campus case?
So, case law is essentially what it comes down to, is because the Supreme Court has decided that that's what's appropriate. Obviously, I think at the time that it was drafted, there wasn't quite the level of government intervention in other kind of functions that are normally a little bit more private. I don't think they ever probably envisioned the society we live in right now.
Well, probably not quite, no.
Yes.
Well, certainly the University of California at Berkeley is an entity that belongs to the state government of California, which is not the U.S. Congress. But then, as I recall my con law seminar way back when, The 14th Amendment now requires that the states, too, adhere to the restrictions that were initially imposed on Congress. So when it says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, that now means through the 14th Amendment, the states, too, they also cannot abridge the freedom of speech. So it's an entity that belongs to the state of California, therefore it can't abridge the freedom of speech. Have I got the logic right from a legal point of view?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
The interesting twist there, though, is where is the state Congress involved in all of this?
Yeah,
and so, I mean, in that context, really, those decisions that are being made by the university administrators are really an extension of the powers that are granted to them by the state legislature.
Exactly. And moreover, doesn't California have its own constitution and doesn't have its own protection of free speech in its text of its own constitution?
Yes.
So
and in fact, it's
double constitutional failure here.
California is actually slightly broader in some respects than the U.S. Constitution's protection on free speech.
That's pretty fascinating. So, that just brings us to these other questions. There were references to other kinds of institutions that were not state of California institutions. They weren't public at all. There was reference to Yale, for example. Were there any other non-governmental universities mentioned there?
It was a Canadian school.
Well, Wilfrid Laurier. But of course, the thing is, again, correct me where I'm getting this wrong, but those non-governmental universities like Yale, nevertheless, are highly dependent upon government funding. They get not only research grants, but their students get massive Pell Grants and student loans guaranteed and so forth. Would that bring private universities under the framework of free speech protection?
No, not at first glance. In California, there's actually just a state law that in some respects extends the protections of the First Amendment to private universities. So even if you're going to Stanford, for example, Stanford can't necessarily violate your constitutional rights, even though it is a private entity. It's not quite as broad as perhaps I would like. It tends to focus on, they're not allowed to discipline a student for exercising free speech rights. But that doesn't necessarily, where do you draw the line as far as what is discipline? If you're making them pay extra money, does that count as discipline, or is that some sort of prior restraint on speech, and therefore it doesn't fall under that category? And unfortunately, it hasn't really been litigated very much. So there's really a lot of uncertainty as to what those protections are.
I see other attorneys in the audience shaking their heads. Yes,
yes.
But so in the movie, we get the thing about the public universities, and then there's the private universities that have these things that you mentioned. But then you guys in your movie broadened it out further to other entities. Someone in your film, maybe you can remind me who it was, said very strikingly that big tech companies like Google and Facebook and so forth are actually now, I think the term was the governance structure. It's a privately owned governance structure that controls the public square.
Correct.
And that was a really interesting argument. So I was trying to find how the First Amendment applied to first the UC campus. That was easy. How it might apply to a private campus, Yale. That was a little harder, but not impossible. But now we want to have free speech rules or norms applying to Google and Facebook and so forth. Do you understand the argument enough to flesh that out? Why you guys included Facebook, Google, et cetera?
Right. So, the key part that we couldn't really ignore was Dennis Prager's role in going after Google and YouTube for basically shutting down some of his videos based on the content of those videos. There is a debate amongst the filmmakers about what is right and wrong. I think we're seeing this as an evolving area of law. Is Facebook or YouTube, are they a better platform for allowing more free speech? I think we sort of make that argument. You would be a better platform for allowing more free speech. But would I want the government to come in and tell YouTube and Facebook what to do? No, I would not.
That's precisely the question that I had in my mind. Yeah. You really wonder about that. But on the other hand, to make the claim, as whoever it was did, that it's the governance structure. Right. That's a pretty interesting claim. So in a moment, we're going to pause and take some questions from all of you. So put your thinking caps on. But in the meanwhile, I'm just wondering if you have any other comments that you wanted to make about, sort of the evolution of the film and how it's been received.
Well, one of the reasons why we wanted to make this film is because as conservatives and libertarians, we complain about culture constantly, about the left wing taking over culture of academia, Hollywood, media. But if you want to influence culture, you have to participate in culture. And film is one of the great American art forms, right up there with barbecue and jazz. And I'm good at 2 out of the 3. So we felt
Which 2?
Barbecue.
Okay.
Barbecue and hopefully the filmmaking.
Okay, good.
We really wanted to do something that would have sort of cultural significance. That's why Donald Trump isn't in our film. We started making this film before Donald Trump existed politically. And we really wanted to just sort of we thought that would just politicize it. People would see it or not see it based on what we did referenced about Trump. We have a bunch of people on the left who are making our strongest arguments in this because we want people to be able to take their friends, take the people who they disagree with to a film to say, hey, maybe we should be able to talk together a little more often. Andrew Breitbart, when I moved to LA, I was fortunate enough to meet him for about 1.5 years before he passed. He always talked about how politics is downstream from culture. And so really what happens in the cultural space, film, music, academia, is decided culturally before anything is sort of ratified in the courts or in politics. So it's really important for us to participate in the culture and put cultural objects out there, art, to really help shape the culture. And so it was one of the reasons why we really wanted to make a film to sort of influence the culture.
Well, we're grateful. Is there somebody with a microphone who's going to help with the questions? Okay. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and our gentleman with the mic is going to come your way. Up in the front, George. Bring it up front first. How about?
Thank you. I have often felt, and after seeing this movie, particularly feel that defending the suppression of politically incorrect speech is intellectually challenging.
Defending the suppression is challenging. Okay.
And the little article, the editorial, the bits of the editorial you read certainly reinforced that thought.
Yes.
However, in my paranoid moments, which happen frequently, as a paranoid, I think the left knows exactly what it's doing here. The left is afraid that these ideas will seduce people away from the ideas of the left. The left wants those ideas to be thoroughly quashed and not heard. And the effects on society as a result of it be damned as long as it leads to the left regaining and maintaining its power. Those are my paranoid thoughts. I guess my question is there any truth in that paranoia?
Well, I don't know which of my colleagues I should. How about to Joe? You want to say something about that paranoia? Is paranoia justified? And George can get back the microphone here.
Yeah. Well, I certainly sympathize with it, but I really think that, and perhaps this is just naive, that this ought to be, and one of the things I appreciate about the movie is that it really ought to be an issue where liberals, not the far left, they're outside. That's where your paranoia is, which I share. But liberals and conservatives really should be lined up on this. It should be a bipartisan issue. And in many of the people you featured on the left, that they totally agree. And I think Dennis Prager came out after this and also said this should be a wedge between the good old liberals and the far left, because the far left is a collectivist, totalitarian type, paranoia inspiring outfit, right? So I agree with that, but I don't think that it needs to be seen as that negative, because I think this is an area where reasonable people can come together from both sides of the political spectrum.
Certainly the principle of the importance of free speech and free expression across different points of view is a difficult plant to nurture. It's a hothouse plant, you might say. Isn't there a tendency among human beings, maybe because we're all somewhat have some selfishness going on inside, we want our views to predominate, but somehow we need to cultivate in ourselves and in others, in the young, an appreciation for a little more refined sentiment, which is the appreciation for the freedom to express and articulate, and that even though each one of us has our own opinions, we also want to have this other opinion, which is different from merely our own opinion, but namely to value the free forum of exchange. It's like an acquired taste. No kid grows up enjoying the taste of coffee, for example. It's an acquired taste. Maybe the taste for freedom of speech is similar to that for the human race. Has to be acquired, easily lost, always needing cultivation. Okay, another question, Dr. Prokocha, and then we'll go a little further back.
It's a wonderful film. I would imagine the impact of a film like that on culture is determined a lot by how widely it's distributed. And I was wondering if you could tell us what you've thought about how you're going to distribute it in film festivals, and if you anticipate any kind of resistance because of the content from critics or from festivals or things like that.
So we have a sort of a real structured release strategy. We opened up 2 weeks ago in Phoenix, on one screen in Phoenix. Dennis and Adam went to Phoenix for the 3 days ahead of the showings. We're going to have one show on Thursday night and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We were able to generate so much interest. We had 7 shows that Thursday night. Every 15 minutes, there was a new show going. And the trick that we're trying to do is that every Monday morning, theater owners around the country get a report of per screen averages. And so our per screen average for that weekend was $45,000, which was the #1 film in the country, per screen average. We're on one screen. But it gets us up to #1, right? Being #1. That was against Joker is out. It was Joker's second weekend. So we were
tough competition.
We were out there. Last weekend, we were #2 in 3 cities against Terminator. Again, we're doing small, very controlled releases in cities that Dennis and Adam both have very good and strong support networks. Salem has been working with us. So this weekend we go to 12 or 15 cities, and I think it's the 15th, don't hold me to the side, the 15th to the 20th, we're in 300 cities to 500 cities.
And are you getting resistance? Are there protesters maybe?
So the worst hit I've seen in the reviews, and I haven't been reading a lot of the reviews, but the worst thing I saw that has been sent around the team was there was an article in Forbes where the author wondered, Adam and Dennis's audience get all this content for free. Why on earth would somebody pay $15 to see 90 minutes of it? And well, I think you guys just saw it. It's entertainment. You know, we want to make something entertaining.
It's entertaining and more than entertaining. Yeah, educational. Right behind you, George, is there a question back there on that side?
I just finished reading The Coddling of the American Mind, which is a terrific book, day before yesterday. And I came to this section, and it's very short. I'll read it to you. They said, if the sum of protesters' actions, and they're talking about the Charles Murray case, where the person's injured and Murray can't finish, but if the sum total of protesters' actions substantially interferes with the ability of audience members to listen or the speaker to speak, then those who are responsible for the interference must face punishment. Then the authors don't say how. So I wrote the authors a letter. And I said, why the cop-out? I mean, you stop where you should begin.
Did they respond?
Yeah, well, I'll wait to hear the response because Luganoff was in the movie all over the place, and he's the guy I sent it to. My question to you is, how would you punish people who do not allow other people to speak?
Greg, can you believe it, Greg?
I mean, personally, I would say don't.
Well, that's not going to stop them.
Well, don't punish them if they interfere with someone else's free speech. Is that what you just said?
If they interfere, it depends on what that means, right? The devil is in the details.
Assault and battery, you're going to stop them and punish them for that.
Right.
That's
if somebody pulls out a gun,
that's already illegal, right?
Yeah. and at that point, it's really not their speech that's causing the problem, right? It's their actions, their activities.
What if you're shouting somebody down? Should you be punished? That's your question, right? And by whom? What do you think?
Should you, for example, University of Wisconsin's trying, should you throw them out of school?
I think Joe's trying to get in here. Am I right, Joe?
Well, that may be a good idea. I think there needs to be some administrative enforcement, but it depends what the crime is and who stopped the speech. And if it's the university, then it doesn't do too much good to round up a bunch of kids and throw them out of school. And I think your letter went to Greg Lukianoff and to.
His book is terrific.
Yes, and the best part.
Yes, the point. It gets to the bottom line.
Yeah. Well, one of the things he also has on his website, or the FIRE website, 5 things everyone can do, like everyone can do if you've been to college. And I'm not sure I can list them all 5, but it's write a letter to your university president saying exactly what you think, right, in terms of this issue. Tell them that your donations to the university are kind of dependent on how they're going to respond to this issue. Take the speech code from the University of Chicago and adopt it and implement it.
They've done better than many universities.
They've done better than most. Talk to young people. I've done that with my daughter and some of her friends who are actually intimidated and self-censoring. And he has a couple other. Go to the website, and they have a number of things that you can do, but some of them involve, many of them involve putting pressure on the university. And the way you can do that is an alumni, and you don't have to give to that university except under certain conditions.
Let me ask the student present, Matt.
Go ahead.
What do you think either the university or the police should have done to those who were interfering with your speech events?
Which ones? It depends.
Well, give me a couple of examples.
Well, the Milo one, I think everyone should have been rounded up and prosecuted. I mean, they were beating people in the streets. I mean,
the Berkeley police never got back to me.
No, the Berkeley police were given a stand down order by the mayor.
Right.
Wow.
That's what happened.
And what should give me an example of what the university can or should do to those who are trying to shut down free exchange?
Well, it depends I think it depends on what they're doing to try and shut it down. If they're
shouting them down.
If they're shouting them down, then they need to ask them to be quiet. There's going to be a question and answer period. If that doesn't work, they need to be taken out of the lecture. But if they're trying to assault someone, well, then
that's different.
That's different. Yeah.
Do you think that maybe after repeat offenses of shouting down, a student should be kicked out of the university?
I don't know.
These are hard questions.
It's a hard question.
That's why he posed them. They're hard questions.
It is a hard question, but at Claremont McKenna, they actually did just. That's where Heather McDonald ended up getting deplatformed. And my daughter happened to go to Claremont McKenna at the time, and she said those were the Pitzer students. They were not the Claremont McKenna students. So she blamed it on the other Claremont colleges. But they did have some disciplinary action, and several people were given semester suspensions or something like that.
I don't have a political or legal answer for you, but I do have sort of a cultural one. Expose them, mock them, and ridicule them. Like the left has become pucker butt, pearl clutching scolds, and we are the ones that are having all the fun now. We are the happy warriors. I don't know if you've seen this culturally, but like if you watch, Daily Wire, these guys are laughing. Our side is great at making memes. Our general happy warrior nature is going to attract more people to it, and the angry Antifa people are going to drive people away as they're exposed and ridiculed for the boneheads that they are.
I'm going to take another question just a second. Hold that question. And it's right next to you, George. You can give it to him in a second. But first, I want to make an observation. One of the most chilling parts of the film to me was the series of incidents at Evergreen State. Of all of them, it was the most troubling to me. And I'm glad that you featured it. And I actually appreciated the ominous background music that you gave to that portion. It was justified. And I loved the obvious sympathy of that woman for, I guess it was her husband, who was the target. All that was worth seeing. But the worst part of it all was seeing the footage of the student who had been made to self-denounce in public. And of course, she couldn't read the words clearly, and it made her even more ashamed, I'm sure. It was so incredibly parallel to what was done during the Cultural Revolution under Mao in China, when intellectuals were sent off to the potato fields and, in other cases, forced to self-denounce. There were the so-called consciousness-raising groups, the whole point of which was to get people to browbeat people and to make them then say how horrible they were and so forth. It's a remarkable totalitarian mechanism.
American POWs in Korea.
Yeah, same thing, same impulse, same source, same ideology behind it. Stunning, really, stunning. Probably the last question will be the gentleman right there who has the mic.
Thank you very much. This is for the attorney. The settlement that you won with the University of California.
This attorney. We do have two attorneys.
I'm sorry.
This attorney.
Hard questions over there.
But it doesn't constitute precedents. Are there any cases similar to that which have actually been ruled on by the court against the university?
Not against the University of California.
Against any university.
Yes, that was actually, frankly, the most startling part of that case is some of these issues are really hard to deal with. But the issues that we were dealing with in that lawsuit, it's already actually pretty well settled. You can't do this. The fact that we had to, kick and scream in order to make them write down a policy, that's black letter law from decades ago.
That's a good answer. In other words, the law was already there.
Yeah.
It really and there are a number of cases where, and almost every time it actually gets litigated, you get a good result or a really good result. So I think one of the things that those of us that believe in the cause should be doing is funding outfits that take these cases. The ones I like the best, and I'm pretty familiar with, are the free speech zone cases. Where a certain place on campus, sometimes it's been calculated to be 0.03% of the campus, is roped off physically to, and you can say whatever you want in the free speech zone.
In that tiny little
exactly.
Space, yeah.
And when that gets in front of the court, it fails every time. And there was a pretty famous case out of LA that focused on that.
Okay, so we are so grateful for this interesting conversation. We need to bring it to a halt because we've been here a long time together. It's been great. In a moment, David Thoreau, our president, will say a few words in parting. But first, let me thank Owen Brennan, Greg Michael, Matt Ronau, and Joe Scherer for their contributions.
I want to thank our entire panel for their wonderful and insightful comments. The discussion, I think, was stellar. I want to especially thank Owen Brennan, Mark Joseph, and everyone involved in the production of No Safe Spaces for a truly great achievement, much needed, very timely. From what I can gather, it's on its way to a great success, a great hit, which is exactly what we need. Copies of our books, Restoring the Promise and Restoring Free Speech and Liberty on Campus, are available at discount in the reception room. We're thrilled that you were all here, and I want to especially thank you all for joining with us. Please visit with us at independent.org, and we look forward to having you here again at a future Independent Institute event. Thank you and good night.